The champagne tower shattered first. Crystal burst across the white marble floor of the Sky Aurora restaurant, and one of Park Min-ho's bodyguards crashed through a table set with gold-rimmed plates and orchids that smelled faintly sweet under the cold scent of spilled wine. Conversations died in a single breath. At the center of the silence stood Kang Tae-joon, black suit immaculate, expressions still enough to make every man in the room reach for courage he did not have. Ji-eun had been left standing beside a pillar instead of seated at her father's main table. The servers had mistaken her for hired staff twice. One senator's wife had looked at her fitted black dress, her dark skin, her sharp, unreadable face, and asked whether Park Min-ho had brought international branding to his daughter's charity launch. Park had heard it. He had only sipped his drink and let the laughter pass over her like rain over stone. Then Tae-joon crossed the room and stopped in front of her. He did not touch her roughly. He only said, "You are coming with me." The danger sharpened at once. Guns lifted, chairs scraped. Park Min-ho rose with a smile too smooth to be real and told his men in a voice meant for business, not blood, "If he moves, shoot." Not save her, not protect her, shoot. Ji-eun understood in that instant exactly what she was worth to her father. Tae-joon's gaze dropped to her wrist. A thin silver bracelet with a cracked phoenix clasp gleamed under the chandelier light. For the first time, the most feared man in Seoul looked shaken. The moment Kang Tae-joon saw the cracked phoenix bracelet, vengeance stopped being simple. The penthouse where Tae-joon kept her did not feel like a prison until she tested the doors. The place was all muted stone, cedarwood, and low amber light, the kind of luxury designed to whisper instead of boast. Rain moved over the glass walls in silver streaks. Somewhere below, the city muttered in distant traffic and sirens. On the table beside her sat tea, untouched food, and a phone with no outside line but full battery, which felt less like mercy than a carefully measured message. He entered after midnight. He did not loom. He did not pace. He stood near the windows, hands at his sides, and said, "No one here will disrespect you." Ji-eun almost laughed at the irony. That was not the promise made downstairs. That promise was not mine. She studied him in the reflected light. Men like Kang Tae-joon were supposed to swagger. He did not. He carried power the way winter carried cold, quietly, completely. When his eyes moved again to her bracelet, she folded her arms. "What do you know about this?" he asked. "Less than you do, apparently." His jaw tightened. Ji-eun looked down at the phoenix clasp, polished thin from years of wear. "A boy put it on my wrist the night my mother died. There was smoke everywhere. He told me to keep moving and not look back." Tae-joon said nothing. "The bracelet would not come off after that," she continued. "I stopped trying." Outside, thunder rolled over the Han River. Inside, the air grew dangerously still. She had expected anger from him, or triumph. What she saw instead was something darker than either. Memory. And when he turned away from her, Ji-eun knew the kidnapping had ceased to be a plan and become a mistake someone would soon pay for. Tae-joon had recognized the bracelet because it had once belonged to the dead. Park Min-ho demanded a negotiation by morning, and he chose another luxury restaurant, as if polished glass and imported flowers could erase what had happened the night before. Tae-joon agreed. Ji-eun expected to be presented like leverage. Instead, when she was brought into the private dining room, every seat was already filled with men whose suits cost more than ordinary lives. Park sat at the head of the table beneath a wall of mirrored bronze. He smiled when he saw her, but the smile froze when Tae-joon pulled out a chair for her before taking his own. It was a small gesture. In that room, it was a revolution. "Sit, Ms. Han," Tae-joon said. "Not daughter, not hostage." Park's fingers tightened around his chopsticks. "You are making a theatrical mistake." "No." Ji-eun said evenly, taking her seat. He is the first man in this city who has not mistaken silence for consent. Several heads turned. One councilman nearly choked on his water. Park leaned forward. Ji-eun, come here. She did not move. His voice sharpened. Do not forget whose blood you carry. She met his gaze across the lacquered table. That has always been your favorite threat. The room shifted. Men who had spent years nodding at Park suddenly found the ceiling, their glasses, their plates, far more interesting than his face. Then Park made his error. He reached across the table and grabbed her wrist. The entire room went cold. Tae-joon did not raise his voice. Take your hand off her. Park did not, perhaps because he had forgotten what fear felt like in public. Tae-joon simply looked at him. That was enough. Park removed his hand. The reversal spread through the room like fire under silk. Ji-eun saw it in the lowered eyes, the nervous swallowing, the first crack in the myth that Park Min-ho controlled every space he entered. When the meeting ended, an old server passed Ji-eun by the corridor and stared at her bracelet with pale shock. I saw that phoenix once before, he whispered, on the night the Kang family house burned. Someone outside the war remembered the bracelet from the massacre both men had built. The old server's memory led nowhere that afternoon, but it led Ji-eun into Tae-joon's past. He took her to a neighborhood far below the mirrored towers and velvet dining rooms, where laundry snapped between buildings and the smell of frying garlic and wet pavement rose from narrow streets. Children ran through an alley bright with painted walls. At the end of it stood a youth centre funded under a corporate name she recognized from Tae-joon's legitimate holdings. Inside were books, clean tables, and a kitchen that smelled like soup and fresh rice. You hide your mercy well, she said. I do not advertise it. Neither did she ask why boys from dangerous blocks greeted him with wary respect instead of fear. She was beginning to understand that the stories told about him in rich rooms had been designed by people who needed him monstrous and simple. In a smaller office upstairs, he placed a file before her. It held records on her mother. Not gossip, not surveillance. Facts. Han Soo-yeon had been Park Min-ho's financial strategist before she became inconvenient. She had traced missing funds, hidden accounts, and payments made the week the Kang family died. 3 days later, she had tried to disappear with her daughter. She had not made it. Ji-eun stood very still as the paper blurred in her hand. My father told me she was unstable, she said. He said she ran because she was ashamed of me. Tae-joon's silence offered no pity, which made it easier to breathe. He let people talk around me my whole life, she said at last. Too black for one room, too Korean for another. Useful only when cameras needed a story. He never had to strike hard. He only had to let the world do it for him. For the first time, Tae-joon stepped closer, but not too close. He was wrong. That simple sentence landed harder than comfort. Below them, a child laughed. Outside, a motorbike slowed beneath the window and did not move on. If that quiet ache found a place in the heart, it was because truth had finally entered the room. By the time Ji-eun noticed the watcher outside, the betrayal had already come from inside Tae-joon's circle. The attack came at dusk as they left the youth centre. No one shouted. A black sedan jumped the curb, doors flying open, and men surged out with the smooth confidence of orders long prepared. Tae-joon moved first, shoving Ji-eun behind a delivery truck as glass burst from the centre's front door. The children were already being rushed through the back by his security, but one terrified little boy froze in the alley. Ji-eun broke cover before anyone could stop her. She darted through the smell of gasoline and rain, caught the child against her hip, and slid behind a stack of plastic crates just as another shot cracked the air. Tae-joon reached them seconds later, his face unreadable and his movements terrifyingly precise. He disarmed one attacker, drove the others back, and ended the assault without chaos, without cruelty, without ever letting Ji-eun out of his line of sight. Afterward, under strobing police lights, Park Min-ho arrived in a convoy of black cars, and concern polished for cameras. "My daughter has been manipulated," he told the press gathering at the cordon. "She is frightened. She does not understand the people around her." Ji-eun stepped past the officers before anyone expected it. Rain caught in her hair and darkened the shoulders of her coat. Microphones turned toward her in a forest of black foam. "No," she said clearly. "I understand perfectly. The men who attacked that center were sent to recover property, not save family. Let every camera record this. I am not my father's possession, and I am not afraid of being seen beside the truth." The flashbulbs exploded. Park's face changed. It happened only for a second, but it was enough. The city saw him lose control, and Ji-eun felt the balance of power tilt under her feet. Back in the car, her hands finally shook. Tae-joon handed her a cloth for the rain on her wrist, and as she pressed it to the phoenix clasp, the cracked silver shifted. The underside sprang open with a tiny metallic click. Inside lay a folded strip of paper no wider than a fingernail. On it was written one number, Vault 19. The bracelet had been carrying a hidden path to the truth for years. Vault 19 was not in a bank. It was in the basement of the very hotel where Park Min-ho hosted his most polished lies, hidden beneath marble lobbies and perfumed air in a private archive reserved for the city's untouchable families. Tae-joon had access, which said more about his reach than any whispered legend. They went after midnight. The corridor below the hotel was cold, lined with brushed steel doors and silent cameras. Ji-eun's heels rang softly on the floor as if the place itself were listening. When they reached the vault, the folded number opened the first lock. Inside sat a narrow cedar box with a phoenix-shaped recess carved into the lid. The bracelet fit it. Ji-eun did not move at first. Tae-joon looked at the box, then at her wrist. "My sister owned that bracelet." The words entered the dark between them and stayed there. "She was 15, he said. "On the night my family was killed, I pulled a girl from a back hallway while the house burned. She was crying, coughing, trying to get back to her mother. I put the bracelet on her so I could find her again after I came back." His voice never rose, but grief roughened its edges. "I came back too late." Ji-eun stared at him, and suddenly the memory returned whole. A teenage boy with smoke on his face, steady hands, and a voice cutting through fire. "Gwenchana," she whispered, and the meaning came with the ache. "Be okay." Tae-joon closed his eyes once, briefly. "I took you to break your father," he said. "If you want to leave after tonight, you will leave untouched. No one will follow." Ji-eun had survived her father by learning the value of composure, but something inside her shifted anyway. "He told me no one would ever choose me over power." Tae-joon looked at her as if the answer had already been decided. "Then he taught you a lie too." She placed the bracelet into the carved recess. The box unlocked with a soft click. Inside were ledgers, photographs, and one recording device labelled in her mother's hand, and beneath it all lay proof that Park Min-ho had not acted alone. The evidence in Vault 19 named a partner powerful enough to bury massacres and build empires from their ashes. The recording destroyed the last excuse either of them could have kept. Han Soo-yeon's voice emerged thin with age, but unmistakably calm. She named Park Min-ho and Chief Prosecutor Choi as partners in the destruction of the Kang family, the laundering of blood money through hotel and shipping fronts, and the decision to silence anyone who discovered too much, including herself. She had hidden the evidence because she believed at least one child should survive long enough to use it. When the recording ended, the room felt smaller. Tae-joon made arrangements before dawn. A car, a new passport, cash, a route south that would take Ji-eun beyond both him and her father before noon. He placed everything on a table in the penthouse and stood back, refusing to crowd the choice. "You owe neither of us your future," he said. It would have been easy to mistake that offer for nobility alone. Ji-eun knew better. It was also surrender. If she left, he would carry the war alone and probably finish it with blood. She looked from the passport to the city beyond the glass. Then she chose herself. Not Park, not Tae-joon, not fear. She called an independent prosecutor whose career had survived precisely because she was too stubborn to be bought, then contacted a financial journalist her father had tried to ruin years earlier. She arranged simultaneous release copies of the ledgers and recording. And when Tae-joon moved as if to object, she lifted a hand. "No more using me," she said. "Not as leverage, not as bait. If this ends, it ends in daylight." He held her gaze, then inclined his head once. Understood. By evening, Park Min-ho sent a formal invitation to his succession gala. Attendance required. So did silence. Park wanted his daughter at the gala because he believed one final public humiliation would break her before the evidence broke him. The gala occupied the top 3 floors of Park's flagship hotel, all white orchids, black lacquer, and chandeliers bright enough to make deceit glitter. Executives, politicians, and socialites gathered in silk and diamonds beneath a giant screen bearing Park Min-ho's name in gold. Ji-eun had spent half her life entering rooms like that as an afterthought. That night, when she stepped from the elevator in a bronze gown with the phoenix bracelet at her wrist, the room parted before her. Park watched from the stage with the smile of a man certain of his script. He began with charm. He praised legacy, discipline, family. Then he invited Ji-eun up, as if granting her relevance. She took the stage and accepted the microphone. "Since Chairman Park has mentioned family," she said, "it seems fair to discuss what he built on top of it." The first ledger appeared on the screen behind her. Murmurs spread through the ballroom. Then came the second document, then the photos, then a financial trail linking Park to shell companies already frozen by emergency order. On a side entrance, investigators moved into place. The musicians stopped playing. Park recovered quickly enough to sneer. "A bitter girl with forged paper is still only a girl." Ji-eun turned toward him. "Then it must trouble you that the prosecution agrees with me." He reached for her arm. Tae-joon, who had remained at the back of the room all evening like a shadow no one wished to name, stepped forward exactly once. He said only, "You will not touch her again." Park froze. Every guest saw it. Every camera caught it. The city's most feared businessman, publicly checked in his own ballroom, looked smaller than his tailored suit could hide. If that silence felt electric, it was because power had finally changed hands where everyone could witness it. Just when Park seemed cornered, the final photograph on the screen revealed a secret about Ji-eun's mother that could still destroy everything. The final photograph showed Han Soo-yeon standing beside Kang Tae-joon's mother 3 days before the massacre, both women holding the same cedar box later hidden in Vault 19. On the back, in hurried handwriting, was a message meant for whichever child survived. "If they come for us, trust the bracelet. It knows the rest." Park saw the photograph and did what frightened men with vanishing power always did. He ran. Not far. Only downward, toward the private basement passage connecting the hotel to the old archive level, where he believed he could destroy the remaining evidence before the investigators sealed the building. Ji-eun followed with Tae-joon at her side, the echoes of pursuit beating through steel corridors lit by harsh white strips. Park reached the archive first and found the cedar box already open on the floor where it had been processed. In his panic, he missed the second compartment hidden beneath the lining. Ji-eun did not. The phoenix bracelet clicked into a narrow groove inside the box. A secret panel sprang loose, revealing one final drive and a signed statement from her mother naming Park as both architect and beneficiary of the killings. No ambiguity, no escape. Park turned, saw it in her hand, and smiled with the broken vanity of a man who still believed blood entitled him to loyalty. "You were alive because of me," he said, Everything you are came from my name. No, Ji-eun answered. Everything I survived came in spite of it. He lunged for the drive. Tae-joon intercepted him, swift and merciless in restraint rather than rage. He could have ended Park there. Everyone in that corridor understood it. Instead, he pinned him against the wall and held him for the arriving agents. Chief Prosecutor Choi was taken 2 minutes later on the ground floor, dragged past cameras he had once controlled. Upstairs, markets reacted before midnight. Accounts were frozen. Partners fled. Board members denounced loyalties they had sworn that very evening. Park Min-ho watched his empire collapse in real time, and for the first time in his life there was no one left to order around. With Park in custody and the war finally over, Tae-joon prepared to disappear before Ji-eun could stop him. He left before dawn. Not the city, only the penthouse, the drivers, the visible power. By noon, rumours were already moving through Seoul that Kang Tae-joon had dissolved several violent operations tied to his name and transferred majority control of his legal businesses into audited trusts. He had cut away the parts of his empire that fed the darkness, as if he had decided vengeance no longer deserved a throne. Ji-eun found him not in a tower, but at the youth centre. He stood in the kitchen rolling up his sleeves while one of the older volunteers complained about broken deliveries. Sunlight touched the edges of his face. Children ran in the hall. The smell of broth simmering on the stove made the room feel almost absurdly ordinary. He looked at her once and said, "Your aunt is already moved to the coast house. My housekeeper went with her. They have security. They are safe." The words settled something deep in her chest. Family safety, at last, sounded less like hope than fact. Then he reached into his pocket and set a small envelope on the table. Inside was a signed confession of his own initial plan to use her as leverage, prepared for her attorneys should she ever need protection from him too. "I owed you the full truth," he said, "and an apology that costs me something." Ji-eun looked at the paper for a long time. "You kidnapped me." "Yes." "You lied by omission." "Yes." "And you still think leaving is the right way to make this easier." His expression did not change, but pain moved quietly through it. "Easier for you." She folded the confession and placed it back in his hand. "That is still you choosing for me." For the first time, uncertainty entered his stillness. Ji-eun stepped closer, close enough to see the sleeplessness in his eyes. "Love does not earn me," she said. "Action does. Respect does. Truth does. If you stay in my life, you stay without chains, without lies, and without asking me to stand smaller so you can protect me." His answer came without hesitation. "Done." All that remained was whether a woman who had reclaimed her name could trust a man who had finally laid down his war. 6 months later, the restaurant opened under a new name. Not Park, not Kang. Han House stood on a quieter street above the river, elegant without cruelty, warm without pretense. The downstairs dining room carried the soft glow of amber lamps and polished walnut tables. The upstairs rooms served as offices for a foundation funding legal aid and scholarships for mixed heritage children who had spent too many years being told they belonged only halfway anywhere. The kitchen smelled of butter, soy, pepper, and fresh bread. Laughter rose easily there. Ji-eun had built it with her mother's ledgers turned clean and lawful, using assets recovered from Park's seized accounts by court order. The city had watched his sentencing for fraud, conspiracy, and murder-related charges unfold with morbid fascination. His holdings were broken apart, his political allies testified against him. His name, once heavy enough to bend rooms, became a thing people used carefully, as if ashamed they had ever admired it. Chief Prosecutor Choi went to prison with him. That afternoon, reporters gathered outside Han House hoping for spectacle and got something quieter. Ji-eun gave them none of the tremor they expected, She wore cream silk, the phoenix bracelet shining at her wrist, repaired but still visibly cracked. She had chosen not to erase the damage. Inside, Tae-joon stood near the back entrance helping unload crates of produce because he said the suppliers charged less when they saw the work done properly. No title attached to him anymore sounded as powerful as his silence had once been, but the silence had changed. It no longer warned the room. It steadied it. When the last guests left, he found Ji-eun on the balcony above the river. Night had laid black velvet over the water, and the city lights trembled across it like gold cut into pieces. He held out a small box. Inside lay the matching bracelet his sister had once owned, restored from what had survived the fire. Ji-eun looked up slowly. "I should have given it to you earlier," he said. "The first one carried you to the truth. This one carries nothing except a choice." There was no pressure in his voice, no claim, only respect. She closed the box and set it aside. Then she took his hand instead. "That is enough," she said. He bowed his head once, almost as if receiving something sacred. "I am still sorry." "I know. And I will spend the rest of my life proving the apology." A lesser man would have called that romance. Tae-joon made it a vow of conduct. That was why she believed him. Below them, the sign for Han House glowed softly in the dark. Her aunt was safe by the sea. The youth centre had new funding. The children downstairs would inherit something better than fear. The dead had their truth. The living had their names back. Ji-eun lifted her wrist. The cracked phoenix caught the light. Once it had marked a night of fire, a rescue, and a war begun by men who believed power meant owning other people. Now it marked survival, dignity restored, and a love that had not been taken, traded, or begged for. It had been earned.